You just watched Mandy. What are your general reactions?
Well, let me caveat a few things first. One, I tend to be fairly judgmental of movies that include Nicolas Cage just because he has a tendency to kind of overdo it.
Yeah.
So I was cognizant of that and tried to watch the movie from a perspective in which I wasn't like rolling my eyes every time he was on screen. So that was something that I had to actively keep in mind while I was watching the movie. That's all fine and good, but it does sort of ruin the immersion just a bit. And second, this is not my genre. I tend to not really find gore particularly interesting or entertaining. Sometimes it can be done in a way that is compelling. That said, I'm glad that I watched the movie for a couple of reasons. To hear that there is at least one person that thinks that this is, one of the better movies of the last 5 years is saying something due to the fact that this isn't my genre. I don't have a lot of comparison that I can make, so I don't know how this ranks up against other slasher flicks, and I don't know how this plays with the tropes within that genre. That might be a good thing, because it means that I'm not burdened by those things when I'm making my assessments. It also could hurt, because things that I might be overly judgmental on might just be tropes of the genre. So my thoughts on the movie as a whole is that as a quasi-cautionary tale combined with a revenge movie, it does give us something to work with. There's more thought that goes into the building up of the plot than in even some blockbuster type, actually in most blockbuster type revenge movies. So I'll give it credit there. There is some thought that goes into the whole process and like what it does to a person to go from being at peace to being like fully driven by revenge or any kind of emotion, but in this case it was revenge. So kind of watching that progression and seeing where the turning points are, which seemed to be very calculated. The movie was paced in such a way that process had a balanced iteration, which is kind of nice. Too many movies out there, there's just this flip. It's just this immediate switch, and there's no time, there's no build-up. Mm-hmm. Which implies that the person had that in them the whole time, and they were just suppressing it. Whereas in this one, we actually see someone who is of a much different nature completely transform due to circumstances, not due to losing control of himself, but due to the circumstances. As a human being, an adaptable entity, the transformation from what he was to what he became required buildup. It required escalation. And as we see the escalation happen, that's one of the more compelling parts about the movie. So I'll give it credit with that. I did think that for the kind of movie that it was, the slow start was a little off-putting. I caught myself kind of mentally wandering from time to time during the first parts of the movie. There are these long, broad shots of natural scenes or of people doing very mundane tasks. Mm-hmm. That kind of caught me up early on in the movie. Now, the pace did pick up eventually. I give it credit for having those long, slow burns early on because it created that build-up, that the correct escalation, and then that fall-off at the end, such that there was not this immediate little flip. So we had a good amount of time to get used to Red and Mandy as peace-loving, quiet people, isolationists. I mean, they weren't particularly, from a perspective of an ethicist, they weren't ethical people. That wasn't it at all. They actually fairly selfish, but not in any kind of harmful way. Just leave us alone, and we'll leave you alone, and all is well, right? Mm-hmm. Their interactions together were a testament to the fact that they were very close, that they had a very strong relationship, that they both liked where they were at in the world. You have this whole buildup of comfort and peace and tranquility and all of that you needed for the end to have the right pacing. So at the beginning of the movie, it can be really hard to kind of push through that. But by the time you get to the end of the movie, you can really appreciate it.
It's interesting because you're making me think about how it's almost like two genres. Like the first half is more of an art film. When you were talking about those awkward scenes where someone might say awkward, another person might say artful, right? Where, you just see Mandy with her book or that scene where she's walking through the forest and she finds the dead deer and she sheds a tear. Like those are very like art house film cinematography. Mm-hmm. And then the last half of the film becomes, a horror movie, maybe even an action movie like Commando, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Commando. There's this combination of art house film and popular culture action film.
I do agree that there is an alteration over time, but I don't think that the genre actually flips because the gore portions of the movie and those parts that are supposed to inflict shock and tantalize and were also done in a way that me as someone who prefers, say, an action movie, it was so far, so distant from realism that it was purposefully unrealistic, right? It's like the way that people bleed, just as an example, right? The way that people burn, the way that people move around and notice things in their surroundings and blah, blah, blah. It was all very genre towards the end, and like you could see that there was purpose to it because there was consistency throughout. For whatever reason, the director felt that going from these kind of broad, long scenes that had a lot of detail and a lot of time to take that detail in. So it wasn't just, here's a beautiful image of a bunch of trees and a lake, but also, here's that beautiful image for 15 minutes. So you can really pick out all the interesting things going on. And then to take that and then very purposefully change it into this almost too dark to watch. Blood flowing in these gallons and gallons that just, it's not possible to have that come from a human being. Like I said, it seemed very purposeful, and it seemed to be part of this transition, as if we were taking this walk from Red as he's going through the transition, right? So at the beginning, he's just as peaceful as the scenery. He does his work, he comes home, he spends time with Mandy, and he's happy. The only time that he shows any kind of stress or discomfort during the first parts of the movie are when she is uncomfortable, which is kind of awesome, right? It's like they are intimately tied together in that way. You really feel like the things that happened to her would change him in the ways that they did. Like, there's no doubt. It's not something where it's like, she was only in the movie for the purposes of motivating the main character. No, it's like integral part of the movie. I think that they gave us more stress on that by naming the movie after her instead of naming it after Red or naming it after something else. Right? I also kind of thought it was interesting that in the early parts of the movie, there's lots of portrayals of art. There's Mandy's works, there's the books, and all these other kinds of things. And then as we get to the later parts of the movie, we see things that are artful, but done in such a way as to be almost ridiculous. The acts that he creates and the church that was built, those things, they have this artistic merit to them. They're just insertions into the movie in such a way as to, Red isn't just going on a revenge thing. He's doing so with a sort of aesthetic and a sort of glee that inspires him to create this thing that he can use in his revenge in such a way that is fitting. I'm going to kill these people with this axe that I made with my own hands, right? And if I'm going to make an axe with my own hands, it's going to be weird looking because I'm not going to go out there with a regular lumberjack axe. That's boring. So you get this kind of, like I said, it's like you're journeying through his sensory output in a way. So even though you're third person out, it's like you're watching this through a filter in the same way that he would be watching it. Like, as the scenery changes and as the cinematography changes, we are following Red's alteration.
There's this theorist named Victoria Nelson. She has this concept called psychocartography. She writes about H.P. Lovecraft's fiction, and the whole idea behind psychocartography is that writers who write about monsters are really writing about their own fears. Like the internal was being externalized, but specifically in like the unreal. Like it's only in fantasy authors where we can have psychocartography. It's just a useful term, I think, because it sounds like that's what that term might apply to what you're talking about. The film maps Red's descent into revenge.
Or psychosis. I mean, revenge is the catalyst, but by the end, revenge isn't really the key anymore. He's kind of just gone straight to the other side of sanity. And while there's no doubt that he's still very much concerned about getting justice for Mandy, it's very easy to see why he would go to certain kinds of torturous extremes in order to get that right, rather than just doing it. It's been very easy for him to manage some of his last moment kills from a distance and without fuss or muss, but they were up close, personal. So I thought that there were several themes, but one of them was this idea that when you seek revenge rather than justice, the tendency is to punish at a level greater than justice requires. And that is for the benefit of the one seeking vengeance, which means that it's not for the person who was wrong. It's a very selfish act. So there's a point at which Red stops seeking revenge for Mandy and is now seeking revenge for himself.
When you said Red seeking retribution for himself rather than Mandy, first I thought that's really interesting because Panos Cosmatos, he says he was really interested in the pathological elements of the male ego. I don't think that he's celebrating Red's revenge. he's not in any way endorsing this. He's not like glorifying this level of violence. I don't know. I mean, there's a question that we would have to table, but like, is Red a hero? I don't know if he is.
Right. So that's actually one of the things that I think is a theme. Evil begets evil. Right. So
evil begets evil.
We have these two people who are peaceful, tranquil, completely out of the line, right? They are happy, very happy to just be, right? They don't need anything, they don't want anything, they have it. As long as they're together, which I thought was really good, because we have these two people, they're not particularly good people, they don't go out of their way, they're not, if Mandy had worked at like an orphanage or something like that, I think that would have actually taken a little bit of away. There's a point at which we see Mandy toking up. It was not medicinal. But like, you're given the opportunity to see that these are people that are just happy, but they're not necessarily like annoyingly good or goody two shoe or anything like that. They just are happy.
Yeah, that scene where they're eating dinner and they're watching cartoons or something. Like, it was just this really intimate moment. From my point of view, that's like the image of a very unambitious happiness, but in a good way, like a very sincere.
It's a stable kind of happiness, a well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you. It was at no point did I think that there was conflict or tension between those two people. Like and it wasn't because they were cookie cutter or because they were mirror images or anything like that. There was no weirdness, right? It was just true that these two people work well together in this way. They can sit in quiet, or they can chat, or they can look at each other over a fire. Like all these things, they can do those things and be comfortable with each other until it's disturbed in some way. But then something evil happens. And without some counterforce compelling Red towards justice or goodness or anything like that, or ethical resolve, the only tool he has available is chaos. His peace has been shattered, his tranquility has been shattered, and his happiness has been taken away in a very real way, right? Like unattainable ever again. Gone. So with those things going on, there's nothing that would tie him to trying to be the better person, to try to find a resolution that was any different than the one that he sought. So in this case, we have truly an evil begets evil. By the end of the movie, Red is a dark entity. Like he
exudes a cosmic darkness, like that character says.
Yeah. It's utterly disastrous to his soul in such a way that he is fully corrupted by the end of the movie. And it's interesting because we see points along the movie where that corruption has physical elements. We see the blood gush on his face after he cuts the biker's throat and things like that, like those changes. And then particularly enjoyed the scene with the chemist. That whole scene was really intense. It was really evocative. And I liked it. It was my favorite scene in the movie.
I was told by someone who is a neuroscientist that when the chemist licks his finger, if that had been real acid that he was creating, that would have been enough to kill him. Apparently that unadulterated level of LSD would be enough to like kill you. For a lot of people who are into drug culture and art about drugs, the chemist is this almost spiritual leader of the drug addicts.
Right, and I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if you imagine someone like that, who is constantly around it, you can almost kind of get the Dread Pirate Roberts kind of thing, right? He's probably built up a significant amount of immunity. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you really wanted to read into it deep, you could. So yeah, the evil begets evil is definitely a big one. The second theme I thought was interesting was this kind of ideal of a dark divine retribution. Red becomes this kind of force of nature, or this kind of force of darkness, probably a better way of putting it. He's not unhurtable, but the hurts that he takes have no lasting effect. When he gets jabbed, slips his bonds, and off he goes, and all is well. He pours some freaking booze on it, and it's good to go. But like, there's this kind of progression, again, of him going from being very weak, like he's able to get snatched out of bed and tied up with barbed wire, and it's all done. They don't even grace us with a moment of the scene enough to see whether he struggled or not. But once the things start kicking in, he becomes more and more physically potent, more and more chaotic and unpredictable, and less human, right? Just less human. Hurts don't cause him trouble. Obstacles don't cause him issue. There's like the scene with the chainsaws. Like, why? Why would he put down this axe to pick up the chainsaw? Because it's a visceral move. He's doing it for a reason, because it's thematic. To him, killing this person with this chainsaw is better. Not more efficient, not quicker, it's better. It's more impactful than it would be for him to just go and chop him up, especially, like by surprise.
It's more novel too. It's like novelty of violence is important. The violence has to be more and more sensationalistic. Yep. So I've already stabbed somebody in the mouth with my spike axe. I need to use a chainsaw. From a horror film enthusiast perspective, the engine of innovation in these films is newer and weirder ways of killing people, and so he's very much an avatar of the genre by choosing the chainsaw over the axe that he's already used.
You're exactly right? There is no scene in the movie where he kills someone the same way. Every person dies in a new and unique way. The axe is only used as an axe once. Then it gets thrown, then it's used as a spear, then it's just used as a prop from that point forward, and everybody dies from some other, or dies off screen. The box cutter, and you got all these. Anyway, so there's this kind of dark divine retribution going on where he seems empowered. Now, whether he's empowered from a high divinity or a low divinity, depending on your tastes, is neither here nor there. But it is definitely some kind of influence. Then there's the whole theme of the fight against entropy. So you have these two people who think that they have found peace, but peace has a way of falling apart. We like to say, life will find a way. Well, so will evil. And in this particular case, we see how even in their tranquility and peaceful existence, evil finds them. You can't flee from entropy. You can't flee from chaos. It's going to find its way to you, and you've got to learn you have to have the mental resilience to be able to resist it and adapt to it and move forward. Now, of course, in this kind of extreme case, how do you predict something like that? But as an allegory to life, this happens. Everything is going fine, and then something happens. And if you can't adapt to that, it'll crush you. So you have to be able to kind of get that entropy back under control and then move forward again. But you have to keep doing this. It's a continuous process. So the fact that they were stable, like even when Red even mentions, maybe we should go, but I like it here. I'm happy here. Red sort of feels that the entropy is encroaching, and he kind of feels it in his bones a bit. So
there's that opening scene where he chops down the tree, you see the tree fall, and he gets in the helicopter, and he's flying away from his job, and he has this real grim look on his face, and this beautiful song's playing. One of his fellow lumberjacks hands him like a whiskey, I think, and he literally snarls and turns his head away. I feel like there is this subtle suggestion that Red knows something is up. Maybe not, obviously not consciously, but he does seem haunted.
Yep. The next one sort of attaches itself a little bit to the evil begets evil thing, right? So it's kind of bad things happen to good people until good people become bad, right? And then they happen to good people. So there's this kind of cyclical, I hate to say it in a way that implies that it was purposefully done to express this, but there is this kind of feeling in the movie that evil wins. So even though Red wins in the end, he's not Red anymore. He's this new dark entity. So there's this kind of concept that all things, given enough time, will go this route, and they will inflict their harms on others. The one thing that kind of gives me a little pause on that is that he does let the girl live, the younger girl in the cult. He lets her live. He didn't have to. He could have very easily solved that problem with a quickness, but he lets her live. That was interesting. If the transition had gone as far as I had thought that it would have gone by that point, that it wouldn't have even been a thought, right? He wouldn't have even thought about it. So there's a little hope for Ray, but by the end, it's gone. By the end, it's gone.
The music was provided by Mitch Hunt. The song is Perfect Life. It's on Spotify. Thanks for listening.